3 months after my sister abandoned her child, a shocking turn of events. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I watched my sister wipe a fake tear from her cheek as she toasted to her new, childless life, while the son she abandoned waited safely miles away. The air inside the extravagant country club was thick with the scent of imported white lilies and $1,000 champagne. I'm Nora. I am 28 years old, a freelance graphic designer who used to spend her peaceful weekends painting and drinking cheap coffee. Now, I am the fiercely protective, utterly exhausted mother of a deeply traumatized 4-year-old boy named Leo. As I stood in the heavy shadows of the massive, crystal-draped ballroom, gripping a thick manila folder so hard my knuckles were bone white, my heart pounded a frantic, violent rhythm against my ribs. Inside this unassuming folder was the icy, indisputable proof of a fraud so deeply sickening it defied basic human comprehension. I looked past the towering ice sculptures and the string quartet directly at my older sister, Chloe. She was draped in custom couture silk, laughing delicately at a joke made by her ridiculously wealthy new fiancé. She was playing the role of the delicate, tragic widow perfectly. None of these ultra-rich socialites sipping their vintage wine had absolutely any idea what kind of calculating, heartless monster was standing right among them. They didn't know about the freezing, rainy night she dumped her own flesh and blood on my porch like discarded trash. They certainly didn't know about the stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. What kind of mother cashes a $500,000 check and leaves her son with nothing but a cheap suitcase? I had asked myself that question 1,000 times over the last grueling months. Tonight, I would force her to answer it in front of everyone she was desperately trying to impress. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the heavy weight of the financial ledgers, the offshore bank wire confirmations, and the emergency custody papers in my hands. I had sacrificed my savings, my career, and my entire former life to protect the innocent child she threw away. The flashing police lights were about to shatter her perfect, million-dollar illusion forever. Growing up, Chloe was always the undeniable center of our chaotic universe. She was the textbook definition of a professional victim, perfectly manipulating every single situation to ensure she received maximum sympathy and attention. If I scraped my knee, Chloe suddenly had a mysterious, debilitating migraine that required everyone's focus. When she married David, a kind, hardworking architect, we all genuinely hoped she would finally mature into a responsible adult. But when David passed away suddenly from an undiagnosed heart defect just 3 years later, Chloe instantly weaponized her grief. Fast forward to a miserable, freezing Tuesday night last November. It was pouring rain, the kind of torrential downpour that violently rattled my apartment windows. At exactly midnight, frantic pounding echoed through my tiny living room. When I opened my front door, Chloe was standing on my welcome mat, completely drenched and sobbing hysterically. Standing next to her was 4-year-old Leo, clutching a battered stuffed bear, his little face entirely pale with terror. Chloe shoved a cheap, broken-zippered suitcase into my hallway. "Nora, I can't do this anymore," she hyperventilated, gripping her hair with shaking hands. "I am completely broke. I have absolutely nothing left. My mind is broken, Nora. I am starving. I'm having dark thoughts, and I need to check myself into a psychiatric facility right now before I do something irreversible." Before I could even fully process what was happening or ask a single logical question, she kissed Leo's forehead, turned around, and sprinted back into the blinding rain. "Annie, Nora, why is Mommy running away?" Leo whispered, his tiny voice trembling violently. "She's just sick, sweetheart. She'll be back." I lied, trying to hold back my own terrified tears. I yelled her name, stepping out into the freezing downpour, but she jumped into a waiting cab and vanished into the pitch-black night. I was left standing in my doorway, staring down at my terrified nephew, my entire world flipping upside down. She walked into the freezing rain, leaving me alone with a terrified, weeping child. The first 3 months were an absolute, unmitigated nightmare of exhaustion and profound emotional devastation. Leo's severe trauma manifested in the most heartbreaking ways possible. Every single night, around 2 in the morning, he would wake up screaming uncontrollably, violently thrashing in his tangled bedsheets. utterly convinced that I was going to abandon him in the dark just like his mother did. I spent countless agonizing hours rocking him back and forth on my cramped living room floor, softly humming lullabies while he soaked my t-shirt with his desperate tears. To be the full-time mother he desperately needed, I had to drastically scale back my freelance graphic design business. I lost my 3 biggest corporate clients within the first 6 weeks because I couldn't meet their demanding deadlines while simultaneously managing Leo's intense, crippling separation anxiety. My modest savings account drained with terrifying speed as I bought him winter clothes, nutritious groceries, and specialized play therapy sessions. I tried calling Chloe every single day. I left dozens of frantic voicemails, begging her to just let us know she was alive. "Chloe, please, Leo just needs to hear your voice for 2 minutes," I pleaded to her digital inbox. But by the 3rd week, the automated operator informed me that her phone number had been permanently disconnected. Our extended family fully believed her tragic, fabricated narrative. They assumed she was locked away in a strict residential psychiatric facility, bravely fighting through a severe mental breakdown. "Did you ever resent her?" my best friend asked me one evening. "I couldn't," I replied tiredly. "She's sick, and he needs me." I willingly sacrificed my social life, my financial stability, and my own mental health, genuinely believing I was holding the fort while my severely depressed sister healed. I practically lived in a state of permanent sleep deprivation, existing entirely on lukewarm instant coffee and sheer willpower. I was drowning in exhaustion, completely unaware that the worst nightmare was just beginning. The fragile, exhausting routine I had desperately built completely shattered on a bleak Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen trying to coax Leo into eating some plain oatmeal when he suddenly doubled over, screaming in absolute, blinding agony. His skin was pale and clammy, and his temperature was spiking dangerously high. Panicking, I scooped his rigid little body into my arms, sprinted to my beat-up car, and broke nearly every speed limit driving to the nearest emergency room. After a frantic series of blood tests and an urgent abdominal ultrasound, a grim-faced pediatric surgeon pulled me into the sterile hallway. "It's severe appendicitis, and it's perilously close to rupturing," he explained quickly. "We need to get him into the operating room immediately." I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me. "Yes, please, whatever you need to do to fix him," I said. But then the hospital's legal administrator stepped forward, holding a thick stack of liability clipboards. "Miss, our records show you are only listed as an emergency contact, not a legal guardian. Because this is a major, invasive surgery, we legally require the signature of his biological mother or a court-appointed guardian to proceed." Panic violently seized my chest, making it entirely impossible to breathe. His mother is gone. She abandoned him months ago, and her phone is disconnected. I am the only family he has here, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. The administrator looked deeply sympathetic, but firmly shook her head. "I am so incredibly sorry, but our hands are legally tied unless it becomes a literal life-or-death cardiac event. We need Chloe's explicit, documented consent, or we cannot operate. What happens if it ruptures while we wait for a signature?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "We manage the infection as best we can," the doctor replied grimly. Leo was writhing in pain on the hospital bed, crying out for me to make it stop, and I was entirely paralyzed by bureaucratic red tape. Without her legal signature, the doctors could not perform the surgery to save him. I practically sprinted out of the bustling emergency room and collapsed onto a concrete bench in the freezing hospital courtyard, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone screen. I had exactly one person left to call: Uncle Mark. Mark was David's older brother, a brilliant, meticulous forensic accountant who had always been the grounded, practical rock of their side of the family. He loved little Leo fiercely. When he answered on the second ring, I didn't even bother saying hello. "Mark, Leo is in the hospital with severe appendicitis, and they legally refuse to operate without Chloe's signature. I need to find her right this exact second." I sobbed into the receiver, my voice completely frantic. "I need you to pull David's old tax records, his life insurance contacts, whatever financial footprints you have. There has to be an emergency contact listed for whatever psychiatric facility she checked herself into." Mark was instantly alert, his accounting brain shifting into high gear. Breathe, Nora. I am booting up my secure desktop right now, he promised. I have the master files from when I helped her settle David's incredibly complex estate last year. Give me 10 minutes to trace the residual insurance payouts or find her last known active banking location. I sat in the cold, listening to the rapid, rhythmic clacking of his keyboard over the phone line. Every single agonizing second that ticked by felt like an entire lifetime while Leo suffered inside. I prayed silently, hoping against hope that Mark would find a clinic name, a doctor's number, anything that would allow me to secure emergency medical power of attorney. Suddenly, the furious typing on Mark's end completely stopped. An eerie, heavy silence stretched across the phone line for several long moments. Nora, he breathed out, sounding as though all the air had been violently punched from his lungs. This doesn't make any sense. I gripped the phone, my stomach dropping rapidly. His voice dropped to a frantic whisper as he stared at the financial ledger. What doesn't make sense, Mark? Just give me the damn phone number. I practically screamed into the receiver, my patience entirely evaporated by sheer, unadulterated panic. Nora, there is no psychiatric facility. There is absolutely no bankruptcy, Mark said, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of profound confusion and rising anger. When David passed away, his premium life insurance policy paid out a standard sum to Chloe, yes. But he also deliberately set up a secondary, highly protected survivor trust fund specifically and exclusively for Leo's future care. I stood up, gripping the freezing metal armrest of the hospital bench. What trust fund? Chloe stood in my hallway and swore she was starving and absolutely destitute. Mark took a deep, ragged breath. David left a trust fund containing exactly $500,000. As the surviving parent, Chloe was the sole executor. The banking ledgers right in front of me show that she aggressively liquidated the entire $500,000 account. The world tilted violently on its axis. When, Mark? When did she empty Leo's account? I demanded, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. Are you absolutely sure, Mark? Maybe it went into a locked savings? I asked, desperately grasping at straws. It went offshore, Nora, he confirmed coldly. The final, massive wire transfer fully cleared on November 12th. November 12th. The exact same freezing, rainy Tuesday night she had shown up at my apartment sobbing about being utterly broke, dumped a terrified 4-year-old on my welcome mat with a broken suitcase, and vanished into the night. She hadn't run away because she was having a mental breakdown. She had run away because she had just stolen $500,000 from her own grieving child. The absolute sheer magnitude of her betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. My knees literally buckled, and I sank back down onto the cold concrete bench, entirely speechless. What kind of mother cashes a $500,000 check and abandons her own innocent boy? The shocking revelation regarding the stolen $500,000 temporarily shifted my brain from sheer panic into a state of hyper-focused, cold-blooded survival. Through Mark's frantic intervention and his aggressive legal threats to the hospital's administration, we finally secured an emergency medical proxy, allowing the surgical team to successfully remove Leo's appendix just moments before it ruptured. As I sat by his hospital bed for the next 3 days, watching his tiny chest rise and fall steadily, my grief fully mutated into a blinding, calculated rage. Mark and I began secretly communicating every single night, digging relentlessly into the massive digital breadcrumb trail Chloe had carelessly left behind. Look at this routing number, Nora, Mark said during one of our late-night video calls, holding up a heavily redacted financial document to his webcam. She didn't just withdraw the cash. She strategically wired it through a series of complex shell corporations in the Cayman Islands before depositing it into a private Swiss account. This requires meticulous planning. You don't execute international corporate wire fraud while suffering from a sudden, spontaneous mental health crisis. We spent 2 grueling weeks analyzing every single transaction date. She had started processing the massive trust fund liquidation exactly 4 days before she dumped Leo at my apartment. She had deliberately purchased a burner phone, systematically disconnected her primary number, and meticulously packed her expensive designer clothing while deliberately leaving Leo with cheap, worn-out t-shirts. Did she think we would never look? I asked Mark, my voice laced with pure venom. She thought we were too stupid and too trusting. he replied. Every single tear she had shed on my porch was a calculated, Oscar-worthy performance designed entirely to manipulate my empathy. She wasn't a tragic, grieving widow broken by the harshness of the world. She was a cold, calculating predator who had financially gutted her own child. The dates on the bank statements formed a picture of pure, calculated, sickening evil. We had the damning financial proof, but we still had absolutely no idea where on earth Chloe was physically located. The offshore accounts were entirely protected by strict international banking privacy laws, creating a massive brick wall in our secret investigation. Then, late one exhausted Thursday night, I had a sudden, desperate stroke of inspiration. Before she vanished, Chloe had exclusively used a very specific, highly stylized profile picture on her old, now-deleted email account, a professional portrait of her looking wistfully over her shoulder. I saved the archived image from an old family thread and ran it through a powerful, advanced reverse image search engine. I sat in my dark kitchen, the harsh blue light of the laptop screen illuminating my tired face, and waited as the progress bar slowly crawled across the screen. Suddenly, a massive grid of matching image results aggressively flooded my monitor. My jaw literally dropped open. The picture was linked to a highly curated, fully verified social media account under the name Chloe Kensington. I clicked the link, and my stomach violently churned. The grid was absolutely overflowing with bright, high-resolution photos of Chloe living an outrageously opulent lifestyle. There were pictures of her sipping expensive vintage champagne on the deck of a sleek private yacht in Monaco. There were videos of her laughing joyously while modeling custom haute couture dresses in Paris. There were breathtaking snapshots of her lounging by the infinity pool of a massive luxury villa. She abandoned her child in a rainstorm so she could play pretend as a jet-setting billionaire. I whispered to the empty room, feeling physically ill. She looked radiant, perfectly tanned, and entirely carefree. There was absolutely no trace of grief, no sign of a mental breakdown, and sickeningly, absolutely no mention of her son. The bio on her profile simply read, "Wanderlust soul. Finding beautiful new beginnings." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking with an intense, violent fury. She wasn't locked in a psych ward. She was sipping champagne on a yacht. I immediately sent the social media profile link to Mark, and together we plunged entirely down the sickening digital rabbit hole of Chloe's glamorous new life. It didn't take us long to discover the ultimate, horrifying reason behind her massive rebranding effort. Mingled among the yacht pictures and designer handbag showcases were dozens of romantic, highly staged photos of Chloe clinging to a very handsome, significantly older man. A quick internet search identified him as Julian Vance, the notoriously wealthy heir to a massive, multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate empire based in our very own state. They were officially engaged. But the absolute darkest, most unforgivable lie was discovered when I found a lengthy digital interview Chloe had recently done with an elite, high-society bridal magazine. The article detailed their fairy tale romance and how Julian had lovingly rescued her from the depths of profound despair. My blood ran completely cold as I read her printed quotes out loud to Mark over the phone. "Losing my late husband was the hardest trial of my life," Chloe told the interviewer. I read, my voice shaking with pure rage. "It was incredibly lonely. Julian has brought the light back into my world. We are so excited to build our family together, especially since I sadly never had children of my own during my first marriage." I stopped reading and violently slammed my laptop completely shut. What kind of monster looks a reporter in the eye and claims her living, breathing 4-year-old son never existed? I asked Mark. He had no answer. She hadn't just abandoned Leo. She had entirely, deliberately erased him from her existence. She stole his $500,000 future to buy her way into a billionaire's inner circle, actively playing the role of the tragic, childless widow to secure her wealthy new target. It was a level of sociopathic manipulation I couldn't even fully comprehend. She had completely erased her own son from existence just to marry into wealth. The agonizing grief that had weighed heavily on my shoulders for the past 3 months instantly burned away, replaced entirely by a pure, calculated, and incredibly dangerous rage. I didn't just want to yell at Chloe or shame her privately. I wanted to completely incinerate her fake, glamorous new life and ensure she spent years locked inside a cold federal prison cell. Mark and I immediately shifted into absolute overdrive. Using the remaining funds from my heavily depleted savings account, I officially hired a ruthless, highly recommended family law attorney. Simultaneously, Mark engaged a certified forensic accountant who specialized in aggressive international asset recovery. We didn't breathe a single word of our shocking discoveries to the rest of the extended family, knowing Chloe's manipulative lies had deeply infected them. We operated entirely in the dark. My attorney quietly and swiftly filed for emergency sole legal custody of Leo, using the overwhelming medical records and documented proof of Chloe's total abandonment to expedite the complex judicial process. Meanwhile, Mark and the forensic team painstakingly compiled an airtight, massive dossier proving definitively that Chloe had committed deliberate wire fraud and gross embezzlement of a minor's protected trust. We have the original trust documents, the exact offshore wire routing numbers, and the IP addresses proving she executed the transfers, Mark assured me grimly. This isn't just a civil family dispute anymore, Nora. This is a severe federal financial crime. She crossed state and international lines to hide stolen money. How are we going to deliver this? I asked my lawyer, staring at the thick stacks of paper. Publicly, he replied with a sharp, dangerous smile. We meticulously organized every single piece of damning evidence into sleek, heavy manila folders. We weren't just going to confront her with angry words and emotional tears. We were going to build an ironclad cage of evidence she could never escape. To execute our ultimate plan of total destruction, we needed the perfect, most devastating stage. Chloe's highly active social media account gleefully provided us with the exact coordinates. She had been aggressively boasting online for weeks about her upcoming, incredibly lavish engagement party, hosted by her billionaire fiancé's family. According to the digital invitations she proudly posted, the event was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the incredibly exclusive, ultra-prestigious Oak Ridge Country Club, a massive venue that reportedly cost over $100,000 just to rent for a single night. It was going to be a massive, highly publicized gathering of the city's most elite, wealthy socialites, politicians, and business moguls. It was the absolute pinnacle of her entirely fake, meticulously crafted high society illusion. I easily secured our entry by confidently RSVPing to the digital event planner using the name of one of Julian's obscure, distant corporate subsidiaries that Mark had uncovered during his financial deep dive. They didn't even bother double-checking the guest list. On the morning of the party, Mark made a highly confidential, perfectly timed phone call to a senior detective in the local financial crimes division, a contact his forensic accountant frequently worked alongside. We provided them with a secure digital copy of the embezzlement dossier and arranged for them to be waiting quietly in the country club parking lot exactly at 8 o'clock. I hired a trusted, professional nanny to stay at my apartment and keep Leo completely safe and happily distracted with movies. "Are you scared?" Mark asked as he picked me up in his sedan. "I'm terrified," I admitted honestly, clutching the manila folders. "But I'm doing this for Leo. She doesn't get to win." I bought a sleek, unassuming dark dress from a local thrift store and pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I zipped up my dress, ready to completely destroy the monster who broke us. Mark and I arrived at the massive, sprawling Oak Ridge Country Club just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant shades of gold and purple. The sheer opulence of the venue was genuinely staggering. Valets in crisp white uniforms rushed to park an endless parade of luxury sports cars and imported sedans. Inside the grand ballroom, towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm, glittering light over hundreds of incredibly wealthy guests mingling over tables draped in expensive silk. We quietly slipped past the distracted security detail, clutching our thick manila folders tightly against our chests, and positioned ourselves near the massive, towering ice sculpture near the back of the room. It only took me a few seconds to completely locate her. Chloe was standing directly in the center of the room, entirely surrounded by an admiring crowd of elite socialites. She was wearing a breathtaking, custom-tailored designer gown that likely cost more than my entire annual salary. She was throwing her head back, laughing delicately, playing the absolute perfect role of the sweet, charming, childless bride-to-be. She looked perfectly radiant, utterly devoid of even a single ounce of guilt or maternal remorse. Julian, her wealthy fiancé, stood proudly beside her, beaming with absolute adoration as he kissed her cheek. My stomach violently churned with a mixture of profound disgust and furious adrenaline. "Wait for the speeches," Mark whispered, his eyes locked on her. "Let her build herself up as high as possible before we kick the ladder out." I nodded, my heart hammering. I watched her gracefully accept compliments on her massive, blinding diamond engagement ring, a ring entirely funded by the social status she bought using her traumatized son's stolen future. I felt Mark's hand gently but firmly squeeze my shoulder, grounding me in the chaotic moment. She looked like an absolute angel, but I held the proof of her sins. At exactly 8:30, Julian confidently tapped his heavy crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The sharp, clear ringing sound instantly silenced the massive, chattering ballroom. He stepped up to a small, elegantly decorated microphone stand near the head table, pulling Chloe warmly against his side. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Julian began, his voice echoing loudly through the sound system. "When I met Chloe, I met a woman who had suffered unimaginable, profound tragedy. A young widow who had lost everything, yet still possessed the bravest, most beautiful heart I have ever known. Tonight, we celebrate a gorgeous new beginning for us both." The wealthy crowd politely, awed, and began to clap enthusiastically. That was my exact cue. Before the applause could fully fade, I aggressively shoved my way through the dense crowd of socialites, marching directly toward the front of the lavish ballroom. I didn't hesitate. I walked right up to the stage, grabbed the secondary microphone from its stand, and turned to face the incredibly confused sea of elite guests. "It is a beautiful story, Julian," I announced, my voice booming clearly through the massive speakers. "But it is an absolute, entirely fabricated lie." Chloe's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly, ghostly white as her eyes locked directly onto mine. "Who are you?" Julian demanded angrily, stepping protectively in front of her. "I am her sister, Nora," I declared fiercely. I slammed the heavy manila folders directly onto their pristine cocktail table. "And I am the legal guardian of the terrified 4-year-old son she deliberately abandoned in the rain after she systematically embezzled his $500,000 survivor trust fund. She didn't lose everything. She stole everything," I yelled, pointing directly at her trembling face. "She's not a childless widow. She's a fugitive." The entire ballroom gasped as the horrifying truth about the blushing bride echoed loudly. Total, absolute chaos violently erupted inside the lavish ballroom. The collective gasp from the elite crowd was deafening. Julian stared at the thick stack of banking ledgers and custody documents I had violently slammed onto the table, his expression rapidly morphing from protective anger to utter, horrifying realization. "Chloe, what is she talking about? You said you never had children," Julian demanded, his voice cracking with shock as he aggressively backed away from her. Chloe's meticulously crafted mask slipped entirely, revealing the panicked, cornered predator underneath. "She's lying. Nora is insane. She's obsessed with me. Get security," she shrieked hysterically, desperately trying to grab the folders off the table. But Mark stepped forward, forcefully planting his hand firmly on the documents. "These are verified offshore wire transfers, Julian. She stole $500,000 from a grieving 4-year-old boy to buy her way into your life," Mark stated coldly. Julian looked at the undeniable financial proof, then looked at Chloe's terrified, guilty face. He ripped the diamond engagement ring right off her finger and walked away in absolute disgust. "You can't do this to me," she wailed, tears destroying her perfect makeup. Nobody stepped forward to help her. They just watched her fall. Before Chloe could even attempt to run for the exit, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung violently open. For uniformed police officers, led by the financial crimes detective Mark had coordinated with, marched purposefully into the room. "Chloe Kensington, you are under arrest for severe wire fraud, grand embezzlement, and felony child abandonment," the lead detective announced loudly, grabbing her arms. She screamed and thrashed, her expensive designer gown ripping loudly as they forcefully marched her out of the luxurious country club. The cold steel handcuffs clicked shut, officially ending her sick and twisted fairy tale. It has been exactly 1 year since that explosive, unforgettable night at the country club, and our lives have completely transformed. Chloe's fake empire violently crumbled to ash. Because she had brazenly crossed international banking lines to hide the stolen money, the federal government quickly took over the criminal case. She is currently sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting trial, facing up to 20 rigorous years behind bars. With the aggressive help of Mark's forensic accounting team and the authorities managed to seize her hidden offshore accounts and fully restore Leo's $500,000 trust fund. Julian's incredibly wealthy family, deeply horrified by the massive public scandal, sent a very generous, private donation to Leo's education fund before permanently cutting all ties. But the absolute most important, beautiful victory has nothing to do with the money. Last month, after passing all the rigorous background checks and home evaluations, the family court officially approved my permanent, legal adoption of Leo. He doesn't wake up screaming in the middle of the night anymore. He is a happy, thriving 5-year-old boy who loves painting messy pictures in our living room and calls me mom. Raising him has fundamentally changed the core of who I am. I used to be entirely focused on my quiet, independent freelance career, but now my entire universe revolves around his bright, infectious smile. I look at Leo running through the park, his laughter echoing in the sunshine, and I know every single tear was worth it. We survived the storm together. Blood does not automatically make you a family, and giving birth certainly does not magically make someone a real mother. True parenthood is about showing up, making brutal sacrifices, and fighting fiercely in the dark. Sometimes the most beautiful families are built entirely from the ashes of unimaginable betrayal.